Welcome everybody to our online session tonight in which we're going to be discussing Unit 3, Basic Economic Concepts, and the concept of supply and demand. So supply and demand is something that governs almost every economic decision we make, and it is very important to understand as we move forward into the larger, more macro economic concepts. So what is demand? Demand is, one would easily see, is different quantities that people are willing and able to buy at different prices. So it's the ability, the desire, and the willingness of you, the consumer, to buy a product, right? So you have demand for iPhones or cars or soda. That is all things that you demand or want. Now, for it to be considered quote unquote demand, you have to have the ability to buy it as well, right? I want a BMW, but that doesn't mean I demand one. I don't have the ability to get a BMW. So when we're talking about micro and macroeconomics, micro is dealing with the small scale decisions by firms and individuals in which supply and demand falls into, right? So the decisions for Apple to produce iPhone 7s and then on the consumer side, you demanding those iPhone 7s. Now on the other side of the coin, macroeconomics is dealing with the larger scale things. So government, how does the government play a role? And that's what we'll get into later on in Unit 4. So just as in science, there are also laws of economics. And the first law we need to understand is the concept of the law of demand. So the law of demand states that as price increases, your demand will decrease and vice versa. It makes sense, right? When cell phones are $10,000, very few people in our economy will be able and willing to buy one. But as those go down to, let's say, 9,000, and then 8,000, and 7,000, and 6,000, and then 5,000, the demand picks up as less expensive the product becomes. Flip that around, and if the product starts off at $200 and skyrockets to 10,000, there's going to be very few people that are going to be willing to buy that product. And so when we talk about demand, we need to differentiate in terms of quantity demanded. So quantity demanded refers to an inverse relationship, right, with price, right? So at the higher prices, you're going to have a lower quantity demanded, and at the lower prices, you're going to have a higher quantity demanded. So we will illustrate this on a graph using the quote-unquote demand curve. This curve is going to illustrate the quantity that consumers will buy at each and every price for that product. It is mainly illustrating how the price will influence the quantity demanded. Now this is downward sloping because of that inverse relationship. At the higher prices, lower quantity demanded. At the lower prices, higher quantity demanded. As you can see here. High price, low quantity. Low price, high quantity. But we also need to talk about other reasons why your demand for a product might change. So in the red box, you see the concept we just went over, the idea of a change in quantity demanded. The only thing that can change the quantity demanded or a price related things. So if your price goes up for a product, that's going to change the quantity demanded. Everything else staying the same, no outside forces. But we know in our economy that it's not just price of a product that influences our quantity demanded for it. There are many different things that influence the demand for products. Your income being one of them. You have more income, you're going to buy more stuff. You have less income, you're going to buy less stuff. The price of a substitute good, let's say a Samsung phone drops in price by 50%. Well, then some of those customers who would have bought an Apple phone are going to move their demand to the Samsung. Has the price of the Apple phone changed? No. It was the price of the substitute good. And so when we talk about that, we can't illustrate it the same way or use the same terminology. So we need to use the term a change in demand. Now, this may seem like semantics and using just this slightly different words, but it is a very key difference that we need to make sure we understand prior to moving forward. All right, so change in demand is caused by anything that is non-price related. And when we illustrate this on our graph, we're going to be shifting the entire curve left or right, because at every price, there will be a new demand related to that product. So on the left graph here, we see our typical price change. In this case, we're looking at lattes, right? And so the price was $3.50, and at $3.50, 5 were demanded. The price shifted down the curve to $3. Illustrating that inverse relationship, you will see the quantity has increased to 6. Now on this graph, we're looking at what is happening with a change in demand. Now the graph is not illustrating exactly what's happening, but let's just say our blue line is our original demand curve. And let's say D2 over here, the red line, represents what would happen if the entire economy received a 20% pay increase. At every point on the line, at every price, more is demanded. And so we couldn't illustrate that here because all this moving up and down the curve illustrates is a change between one price to another. Quantity here has stayed the same. But here, at every point, we've seen an increase in demand. Not because of price, but because of some non-price outside force. And so line D1 is illustrating the exact opposite. Let's say this is our starting line again, and D1 is our next line. Let's say what caused us to shift here? A 50% drop in pay. Well, at every price point, it doesn't matter. If I have less money in my pocket, I'm not going to demand as many bottles of water as I did before because I have less money in my pocket, not because the price of the product has changed, but an outside force is changing the demand for that product.